They spat on him in the town square while the girl he saved watched in horror from the church steps. Silas McGraw stood there, hat in his weathered hands, as the good people of Cedar Ridge hurled their judgment like stones. His shirt was still torn from the fight, blood dried on his knuckles from protecting her honor just hours before. But now they called him the villain. The morning sun beat down on Main Street as Sheriff Donovan stepped forward, his badge catching the light. You had no right. McGraw, no right at all to lay hands on those men. The crowd murmured their agreement, their faces twisted with righteous anger. Silas looked past them to where Evangeline Porter sat on the church steps. Her blue dress pristine now, her golden hair neatly braided. She was 19, maybe 20, with eyes like winter sky, the same eyes that had pleaded with him for help when those three drifters cornered her behind Mackenzie's general store at dawn. They were fixing to harm her, Silas said quietly, his voice carrying across the square. I did what any decent man would do. Old Mrs. Hartwell pushed through the crowd, her cane tapping against the wooden walkway. Decent. You beat those men half to death. And for what? To compromise that poor girl's reputation? She pointed her gnarled finger at Evangeline. Look at her! Alone with a man like you in the dark. What will people think? The words hit harder than any fist. Silas had served 3 years in the war, lost his brother at Gettysburg, built his ranch with his own bleeding hands. But standing there in that square, with the whole town staring at him like he was something dirty, he felt smaller than he ever had. Pastor Williams emerged from the church, his black coat billowing in the morning breeze. Mr. McGraw, your intentions may have been pure, but the road to perdition is paved with such good intentions. You've created a scandal that will follow Miss Porter for the rest of her days. Silas glanced at Evangeline again. She hadn't spoken a word since he'd carried her to safety. Her lips were pressed tight, her hands folded in her lap, but there was something in her eyes. Not shame, not fear, something else entirely. The crowd pressed closer. Someone shouted, "Ought to run you out of town." Another voice called out, "Decent folk don't want your kind here." But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly know, was that Evangeline Porter carried a secret that would change everything. And in less than 24 hours, those same people spitting on Silas McGraw would be begging for his forgiveness. The girl on the church steps finally stood up, smoothing her dress. When she looked at Silas, her eyes held a promise that made his heart race and his blood run cold at the same time. The stones came first, then the rotten eggs. Silas ducked as a chunk of dried mud sailed past his ear, splattering against the church wall behind him. The crowd had grown bolder, their whispers turning to shouts, their disapproval becoming something uglier. "Get out of our town," Mayor Hutchins bellowed, his round face red with exertion. "We don't need your kind of help." Silas wiped egg yolk from his shoulder, his jaw clenched tight. He'd faced Confederate charges at Bull Run, stared down Apache war parties on the frontier, but nothing had prepared him for this, being torn apart by the very people he'd sworn to protect. Evangeline rose from the church steps, her movements graceful despite the chaos. She walked toward the crowd, her chin lifted high, and for a moment the shouting died down. "Please," she said, her voice clear as a church bell. "Mr. McGraw saved my life. Those men were going to—" "Hush now, child," Mrs. Hartwell interrupted, waving her cane. "You don't know what you're saying. The shock has addled your thinking." "But he saved me," Evangeline insisted, stepping closer to where Silas stood. They had knives. They said terrible things. If he hadn't come when he did— Sheriff Donovan spat into the dirt. "That's just it, girl. How convenient that McGraw happened to be skulking around behind the store at dawn. Maybe he was in cahoots with them drifters. Maybe this whole thing was planned." The accusation hit Silas like a physical blow. His hands curled into fists, but he forced himself to stay still. Fighting would only prove their point. "That's a damned lie," he said through gritted teeth. "Language," Pastor Williams snapped. "You see, this is exactly the kind of man we're dealing with. Violent, crude, ungodly." Young Tommy Fletcher, barely 16 and trying to impress the older men, picked up another stone. "My pa says men like you prey on innocent women. Says you probably planned the whole thing to get close to her." The rock struck Silas in the chest, and something inside him snapped. He took a step forward, and the crowd instinctively backed away. For a moment, the war showed in his eyes. The killing he'd done, the blood he'd spilled, the darkness that lived in every soldier's soul. "I fought for this country," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Bled for it, lost everything for it. And this is how you repay that sacrifice? But even as he spoke, he could see it in their faces. They weren't listening anymore. Their minds were made up. He was the villain in their story, and nothing he said would change that. What none of them noticed was the slight smile playing at the corners of Evangeline's mouth, or the way her fingers traced the outline of something hidden beneath her dress. Something that would arrive with the morning sun, carrying enough firepower to turn their righteous anger into trembling apologies. By noon, they'd burned his reputation to ashes and scattered it to the wind. Silas sat alone in Murphy's saloon, the only establishment in Cedar Ridge that would still serve him. The bartender, One-Eyed Pete, slid a whiskey across the scarred wooden bar without a word. Even Pete's hospitality came with a price. He charged Silas double and made him drink in the back corner, away from the windows. Heard they're talking about forming a committee, Pete muttered, polishing a glass with a dirty rag. Town council's meeting tonight to discuss your situation. Silas knocked back the whiskey, feeling it burn down his throat. Let them talk. But the truth gnawed at him like a hungry wolf. He'd done the right thing, saved a girl from a fate worse than death, and somehow become the monster in their story. The 3 drifters he'd fought off had vanished like smoke, leaving town before the sun was fully up. Convenient, that. The saloon doors swung open, and Sheriff Donovan strutted in, his hand resting on his gun belt. Behind him came Mayor Hutchins and 2 other council members, their faces set in grim determination. "McGraw," Donovan said, his voice carrying the weight of official business. "Town council's decided you're not welcome here anymore. You got till sundown to pack up and move on." Silas stood slowly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "This is still America, last I checked. Man's got a right to live where he pleases. Not when he's a threat to decent folk," Mayor Hutchins wheezed, his jowls shaking with indignation. "That poor girl's reputation is ruined because of you. Her prospects for marriage, her standing in the community, all destroyed by your reckless heroics. Her reputation." Silas laughed bitterly. 3 men were about to rape and murder her, but sure, let's worry about her reputation. Councilman Bradley stepped forward, his thin mustache twitching. "The girl says you saved her, yes, but witnesses saw you alone with her afterward, behind the store, in the dark, for nearly an hour." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Silas felt his face flush with anger. "I was making sure she was safe, making sure those animals were really gone. Making sure of something, that's certain," Donovan sneered. One-Eyed Pete cleared his throat nervously. "Maybe you boys should take this outside. Don't want trouble in my place." But the trouble had already found them. Through the saloon's grimy windows, Silas could see a crowd gathering in the street. Men, women, even children, all of them staring at the saloon like it was a den of sin. Evangeline stood among them, her golden hair catching the afternoon sun. But she wasn't looking at the saloon with hatred like the others. She was watching the horizon, her hand shading her eyes, as if she was expecting something. "You got 1 hour," Donovan said, adjusting his gun belt. 1 hour to get your affairs in order and get out of Cedar Ridge. Don't make this harder than it has to be." As the men filed out of the saloon, Silas caught a glimpse of Evangeline through the window again. This time, she was smiling. Not the demure smile of a rescued maiden, but something sharper. Something that spoke of secrets and power, and a reckoning that was riding hard toward Cedar Ridge on hoofbeats that would shake the very ground beneath their feet. The telegram changed everything. Evangeline Porter walked into the telegraph office at 3 o'clock, her blue dress rustling against the wooden floor. Old Samuel Morse looked up from his machine, his thick spectacles sliding down his nose. "Miss Porter, what brings you here? After what happened this morning, you should be resting." She placed a silver coin on the counter, more money than Samuel usually saw in a week. "I need to send a message. Urgent priority." Samuel's eyebrows shot up as he read the address she wrote. "General Augustus Porter, Fort Richardson, Texas." "Porter?" he stammered. "You're related to General Porter, the Augustus Porter?" Evangeline's smile was ice and steel. "He's my father." The blood drained from Samuel's face. General Porter commanded the entire Texas military district, controlled over 3,000 cavalry troops, and had the governor's ear. Men who crossed Augustus Porter had a habit of disappearing into the desert, never to be seen again. "The message, sir," Evangeline said calmly. Samuel's hands shook as he prepared the telegraph key. Her words were short, precise, and terrifying. Attempted assault stopped by local rancher. "Town, persecuting hero, require immediate escort, departing tomorrow dawn. Evangeline." As the message clicked through the wires, Evangeline turned toward the window. Across the street, she could see Silas McGraw loading his few possessions into a worn wagon. The sight made her stomach twist with something that might have been guilt. "Miss Porter," Samuel whispered, "does your father know you're here, in Cedar Ridge?" "He knows exactly where I am," she replied. "And after today, he'll know exactly how his daughter was treated by the good people of this town." The truth was darker than anyone suspected. Evangeline hadn't been traveling alone when those drifters attacked her. She'd been fleeing an arranged marriage to a brutal cattle baron named Marcus Thorne, a man her father had chosen for political reasons. The attack had been real, the danger genuine, but her presence in Cedar Ridge was no accident. She'd been hiding here for 3 days, working as a seamstress to earn her keep, hoping to disappear into the anonymous crowd of a small frontier town. But when those men cornered her behind the store, when Silas McGraw fought like a demon to save her life, everything changed. Now the town's cruelty toward her savior had given her the perfect weapon against her father's plans. Through the window, she watched Mayor Hutchins approach Silas with a smug expression, probably delivering more threats about leaving town. Neither man noticed the dust cloud on the horizon, still small, but growing larger. "Mr. Morse," she said sweetly, "I think you should know something else. My father doesn't respond well to threats against his family, and he especially doesn't like it when good men are punished for protecting what belongs to him." Samuel dropped his spectacles. "If you were Evangeline, what would you do? Tell the town the truth now and risk losing your leverage, or let them dig themselves deeper into a hole they'd never climb out of? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you choose, because what Evangeline decided next would determine whether Cedar Ridge faced justice or complete destruction. The dust cloud on the horizon was getting bigger. She chose silence, and with it, sealed Cedar Ridge's fate. By 4 o'clock, word had spread through town like wildfire. Samuel Morse, despite Evangeline's implied threats, couldn't keep his mouth shut. The secret burned inside him like a fever until he finally whispered it to his wife, who told her sister, who told the preacher's wife, who ran straight to Mayor Hutchins. "General Porter's daughter?" Hutchins repeated, his face turning the color of old parchment. "Are you certain?" Mrs. Williams nodded vigorously, her bonnet bobbing. "Samuel swears it's true. Sent a telegram to Fort Richardson herself, and the way she looked at him when she said it, Lord have mercy on our souls." The mayor stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. General Augustus Porter was a legend in Texas, a man who'd crushed the Comanche resistance, who'd hanged rustlers without trial, who'd once ordered an entire Apache village burned to the ground for stealing a single horse. And they'd just spent the morning humiliating the man who'd saved his daughter's life. Meanwhile, Silas McGraw finished loading his wagon, unaware that his exile had just become his salvation. He patted his old horse's neck, checking the harness one last time. Everything he owned fit in the back of that wagon. A few clothes, his rifle, a photograph of his dead brother, and the worn Bible his mother had given him before she died. Leaving already? He turned to find Evangeline approaching, her hands clasped behind her back. Up close, she was even more beautiful than he'd realized, but there was something sharp in her eyes that hadn't been there that morning. "Town council made their feelings clear," Silas said quietly. "Reckon it's best for everyone if I move on." "Best for everyone?" She tilted her head, studying his face. "Mr. McGraw, do you know who I am? A young lady who got herself in trouble and needed help. That's all that mattered to me." Something flickered across her features. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment. "And if I told you that helping me might have consequences? Big consequences?" Silas shrugged, climbing up onto the wagon seat. "Already having consequences, miss, but I'd do it again. Some things are worth more than a man's reputation." She watched him gather the reins, her expression unreadable. "My father's coming, Mr. McGraw. He'll be here by dawn." "Your father?" "General Augustus Porter, Texas Military District." She let the words hang in the air like a loaded gun. "He doesn't take kindly to people who hurt his family, and after today he's going to consider this entire town guilty of that crime." Silas felt his blood turn to ice water. He'd heard the stories about General Porter, the mass hangings, the burned homesteads, the unmarked graves scattered across West Texas. The man didn't just dispense justice, he delivered apocalypse. "Why are you telling me this?" Evangeline stepped closer to the wagon, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because in about 6 hours, this town is going to realize what they've done, and when they do, they're going to come begging for you to save them again. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. The sound of galloping horses echoed from the distance, still faint, but getting stronger. Evangeline smiled, and for the first time since that morning, it wasn't sweet or innocent. It was the smile of a woman who held the power of life and death in her delicate hands, and she was about to squeeze. They came with the sunrise like an army of judgment. 100 cavalry soldiers crested the hill above Cedar Ridge at dawn, their sabers gleaming in the early light, their horses snorting clouds of steam in the cool morning air. At their head rode General Augustus Porter himself, 6 feet of weathered steel and controlled fury, his gray beard braided with silver threads, his eyes the color of winter storms. The thunder of their approach woke the entire town. People stumbled from their beds, pulling on clothes, peering through windows at the military force descending upon them like the wrath of God himself. Mayor Hutchins stood in the middle of Main Street in his nightgown, his mouth hanging open as the cavalry formed a perfect line across the width of the town. The horses stamped and snorted, their riders silent as tombstones, their rifles held at the ready. General Porter dismounted with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle. His boots hit the dirt with finality, each step echoing like a judge's gavel as he walked toward the terrified crowd gathering in the street. "Where is my daughter?" His voice carried the authority of cannon fire. Evangeline stepped out from behind the church, no longer the helpless maiden they'd seen yesterday. Now she moved with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly how much power flowed in her veins. She walked straight to her father and kissed his cheek. "Hello, Papa." "Evangeline." His eyes never left the crowd as he spoke to her. "Are you hurt?" "No, thanks to Mr. McGraw." The general's gaze swept over the townspeople like a scythe through wheat. Sheriff Donovan tried to step forward, his hand hovering near his gun, but stopped when 50 rifle barrels swung toward him. "I understand," General Porter said, his voice carrying to every corner of the square, "that you good people saw fit to punish the man who saved my daughter's life." "General, sir," Mayor Hutchins stammered. "There's been a misunderstanding. We didn't know she was..." "Didn't know she was what? Human? Worthy of protection?" The general's hand rested on his saber hilt. "Or are you saying you would have treated her differently if you'd known her blood?" Pastor Williams found his courage first, stepping forward with his Bible clutched against his chest. "General Porter, we were only thinking of the young lady's reputation. In a small town like ours, her reputation?" The general's laugh was like ice cracking. "My daughter's reputation is that she's alive. Everything else is commentary." Behind the general, his soldiers sat motionless in their saddles, but their presence spoke louder than any threat. These were men who'd fought Apaches, who'd survived the desert, who'd followed Augustus Porter through hell and back, and every one of them was ready to burn Cedar Ridge to the ground if their commander gave the word. "Where," the general asked quietly, "is Silas McGraw?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, and every person in Cedar Ridge suddenly realized they were standing on the wrong side of history. The hunt for redemption began with a desperate race against time. Sheriff Donovan's voice cracked like a teenage boy's. "General, sir, McGraw left town yesterday evening. Headed north toward Austin, I believe." General Porter's eyes narrowed to slits. "You drove him out." We thought it was best for everyone concerned," Mayor Hutchins whimpered. The general turned to his daughter, and for the first time since arriving, his voice softened. "Tell me what happened, Evangeline. All of it." Standing there in the morning sun, surrounded by armed cavalry and a terrified town, Evangeline told her story. She spoke of the 3 drifters who'd cornered her behind the general's store, of their knives and their threats, of how Silas McGraw had appeared like an avenging angel and fought them off with nothing but his fists and his fury. "He saved my life, Papa, and they called him a villain for it." When she finished, the silence stretched like a hangman's rope. General Porter walked a slow circle around the gathered townspeople, studying their faces the way a wolf studies sheep. "Captain Morrison," he called to one of his officers. "Yes, sir." "How many men does it take to burn a town this size?" The captain didn't hesitate. 20 should do it, sir. Maybe 30 if we want to be thorough." Several women in the crowd began to weep. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Strong men who'd talked tough yesterday now looked ready to faint. "Please, General," Pastor Williams begged, falling to his knees. "We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But surely the good Lord teaches forgiveness." "The good Lord," General Porter interrupted, "also teaches that ye shall reap what ye sow. And what you people sowed yesterday was cruelty toward a hero." Old Mrs. Hartwell, who'd been among the loudest voices calling for Silas's exile, pushed through the crowd with her cane. "What do you want from us, General? Tell us how to make this right." General Porter stopped pacing and faced the crowd. "I want Silas McGraw brought back to this town. I want him treated with the respect he deserves. And I want every one of you to understand that the man you humiliated yesterday is worth more than this entire settlement." "But he's gone," Donovan protested. "Could be anywhere by now." "Then you'd better find him," the general said. "Because if Silas McGraw isn't standing in this square by sundown, I'm going to assume this town is beyond redemption." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Some of the cavalrymen had already dismounted and were checking their weapons, their faces set with grim purpose. Mayor Hutchins stumbled forward, his nightgown billowing around his pale legs. "We'll find him, General. Send out search parties right away. Bring him back safe and sound." "You'll do better than that," General Porter said. "You'll bring him back with honor. And when you do, every man, woman, and child in this town will apologize to him personally." As the townspeople scattered to organize search parties, Evangeline approached her father. "Papa, there's something else you should know. I wasn't just traveling when those men attacked me. I was running away." The general's expression softened slightly. "From Marcus Thorne?" She nodded. "I can't marry him, Papa. I won't." For a moment, the fearsome general looked like nothing more than a worried father. But only for a moment. Then the steel returned to his eyes as he watched the people of Cedar Ridge prepare to hunt for the man they'd wronged. Time was running out. And somewhere on the vast Texas plains, Silas McGraw was riding farther away from his salvation with every passing hour. They found him just as the sun touched the horizon and brought him back like a conquering hero. Silas McGraw rode into Cedar Ridge at the head of a procession that would be talked about for generations. Mayor Hutchins and Sheriff Donovan flanked him on horseback, their faces showing the desperate relief of men who'd stared death in the face and lived to tell about it. Behind them came half the town on foot, walking in respectful silence. The other half waited in the square, every man, woman, and child who'd cursed his name now standing with heads bowed in shame. General Porter stood beside his daughter, watching as the man who'd saved Evangeline's life dismounted in the exact spot where they'd humiliated him 24 hours before. Silas looked older somehow, worn down by a day of exile and the bitter taste of injustice. "Mr. McGraw," the general said, stepping forward with his hand extended. "I am General Augustus Porter, and I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Silas took the offered hand, his calloused fingers meeting the general's firm grip. "No debt, sir. I did what any decent man would do. But these people," the general gestured toward the crowd, "they punished you for your decency. Tell me, what would be fitting justice for such behavior?" The square fell silent except for the sound of horses breathing and leather creaking. Every eye was on Silas McGraw, waiting to see if he would demand their destruction or show them mercy they didn't deserve. Silas looked around at the faces that had been so full of hatred yesterday. Mrs. Hartwell with her cane, young Tommy Fletcher who'd thrown stones, Pastor Williams who'd condemned him from the church steps. They all waited for his judgment. "General," Silas said finally, "these people made a mistake, a bad one, but I reckon they've learned from it. Sometimes a man's got to fall down hard before he learns to stand upright." The relief that swept through the crowd was almost visible. Children began to cry with joy, women sobbed into their husbands' shoulders, and grown men wiped tears from their weathered faces. One by one, they came forward. Mayor Hutchins was first, his voice breaking as he apologized. Sheriff Donovan followed, taking off his badge and offering it to Silas as a gesture of respect. Mrs. Hartwell could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to whisper her regret. Even young Tommy Fletcher stepped up, his eyes red with shame, to ask forgiveness for the stones he'd thrown. General Porter watched it all with approval, but his attention kept drifting to his daughter and the way she looked at Silas McGraw, not with the gratitude of a rescued maiden, but with something deeper and more dangerous. "Mr. McGraw," Evangeline said as the last apology was given, "would you consider staying in Cedar Ridge? I think this town could use a man like you." Silas smiled, the first real smile anyone had seen from him since the ordeal began. "I reckon I might. Miss Porter, this place is starting to grow on me. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel." The sun set on Cedar Ridge that evening with Silas McGraw standing tall in the town square. No longer in exile, but a hero finally recognized. General Porter offered him a position with the cavalry, but Silas chose to stay and rebuild his life among the people who'd learned to see past their prejudices. He married Evangeline Porter 6 months later, and their wedding was attended by every soul in Cedar Ridge, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love for the man who'd taught them the true meaning of courage. Sheriff Donovan retired and convinced Silas to take his place, where he served with honor for 20 years. The three drifters who'd started it all were never seen again, but rumors said they'd met their end trying to rob a cavalry payroll outside of El Paso. As for Cedar Ridge, it became known throughout Texas as a town where heroes were honored and good men never walked alone. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful